Is the Supreme Court set to overturn Roe v. Wade? CCP caves in as 12 Chinese companies facing delisted from the United States Stock Exchange. What's the lesson for the United States to learn from? Beijing seeks to normalize mandatory weekly COVID testing. Horror video from Shanghai, an old man getting stuffed into a body bag while alive. The Scream of Shanghai video is going viral after The Sound of April. Hi everyone, welcome to the Wei and Kathy show. Today it will be just myself. Wei is on a business trip again. But do you know, actually Wei will have a joke to share with you, but through me, okay? So please stay with me and I will tell the joke and you will judge if that's as good as Wei tells. So first of all, a quick news. Politico published a Supreme Court draft ruling written on February 10th, but has since leaked. The ruling was written by Justice Alito and would overturn Roe v. Wade, the abortion rights mandated by the then Supreme Court in 1973. For the details, we will have more reporting to you in our next show. So today's major story I will share with you is about the Chinese companies listed in the U.S. Stock Exchange. Tomorrow, May 3rd, is the deadline for 12 Chinese companies on the watch list for delisting from the U.S. Stock Exchange unless they can prove that they have met the conditions for listing. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission made that announcement back on April 12th. A total of 23 Chinese companies are currently included in this watch list. So what's the latest move by Beijing to try to keep these companies, the Chinese companies, to continue listing in the United States? According to people familiar with the matter, reported by Voice America, the Chinese and the U.S. regulators are discussing the operational details of an audit agreement that Beijing hopes to sign this year, including on-site audit checks. The Chinese Security Regulatory Commission was reportedly saying that in early April that it plans to revise the regulations on confidentiality and file management related to the overseas listing of domestic companies and to facilitate cross-border regulatory cooperation, including joint inspections. And last week, the vice chair of the commission, Fang Xinhai, said that he expected to reach an agreement in the near future to allow on-site audit inspections by the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, which is a U.S. regulating agency under SEC. So such a move was seen as China's concessions to comply with U.S.'s regulatory requirement for the listing companies in the U.S. So why we had such a problem in the United States listed Chinese companies to begin with? And what does it say about the U.S.-China policy? What's the lesson for the United States in dealing with Communist China from this incident? So first of all, let's take a look at why we had this problem. Before 2002, United States public companies, the brokers and the dealers are self-audited and self-regulated. But two big scandals changed that. In October 2001, a big scandal of fraud at Enron brought down the energy company and caused $63 billion of loss to the public. Along with it, the fall of Enron also brought to the close of 89-year-old big accounting firm, Arthur Andersen. Everybody knows about that. And in 7 months, another big scandal at WorldCom brought down the telecom company and 3 times as much loss, which amounts to $180 billion to the U.S. public. Right after these 2 scandals, the U.S. Congress passed, which is called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, in 2002 to establish Public Company Accounting Oversight Board to oversee the audit of public companies, brokers, and the dealers registered with the SEC. During the second term of the Obama-Biden administration, China pleaded its case of having more access to the U.S. stock market to the then Vice President Joe Biden, who was a point man that Obama on many issues related to China and frequently visited with Chinese leaders. At that time, Biden said in a speech, quote, "I've held the view for so many years and continue to hold the view that a rising China is a positive development." And Biden promised to work towards a resolution. So he said, quote, "The trajectory of the relationship is nothing but positive," referring to with China, and it's overwhelmingly in the mutual interest of both of our countries. And he said, "It's in the interest of the world that we increase the interaction between not only our business community, but our economies at large." And 1 month later, Biden penned an op-ed rejecting the notion that the Communist China posed a threat to the U.S. supremacy and urging Americans to invest in Beijing's success. Within 18 months of that meeting and the op-ed, the Memorandum of Understanding was signed. So what's in the MOU? According to the MOU, China agrees to let the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board gain, quote, "timely access to certain audit documents of its homeland companies, but did not allow on-site audit firm inspections like those imposed on American firms, kicking that compliance issue down the road." In the end, China never allowed the inspections and mostly failed to comply with the document requests, and essentially allowing the country's U.S.-listed firms to enjoy all the benefits of U.S. stock market access without the need to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The SEC and the Company Accounting Board have been raised red flags since 2018, but its lack of action has drawn significant criticism. By April 2021, the board announced that more than 90% of the listed companies that refused to provide audit documents were Chinese companies. Things got changed with President Trump. In 2019, he said, "Oh, no, we cannot keep letting the Chinese companies refusing to show us their books." So at the end of 2020, President Trump signed into effect the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act, which requires foreign companies listed on United States exchange to comply with U.S. auditing standards. Otherwise, they will be facing delisting. The Foreign Company Accountability Act prohibits foreign companies from listing on any U.S. exchange if they failed an audit by the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board for 3 consecutive years. So now the Biden administration is following through that policy. So the danger of China's non-compliance with, which triggered the enforcement by the Biden administration, was dramatized by the spectacular collapse of coffee company in China called Luckin Coffee. Luckin Coffee went public on the United States Stock Exchange in 2019 and used Wall Street to raise $500 million on the bold promise that it could become the Starbucks of China. The company collapsed about a year ago after investors were told its $12 billion valuation was based on inflated accounting. The company reported has admitted that it fabricated its 2019 revenue numbers. This created big political pressure to resolve the auditing problem. And Luckin Coffee is only one of the 156 Chinese companies with a combined market capitalization of $1.2 trillion on the U.S. stock market. Other Chinese companies in this group include Alibaba Group Holding Company and China Petroleum and Chemical Corp. So that's the story and the background. So what's the lesson for the U.S. to learn in dealing with the communist China? I talked to General David Stilwell a while ago, but I think this interview actually really applies to what we are talking about today. If you remember, General Stilwell was the former Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs under the Trump administration. And prior to that, he served as the director of the China Strategic Focus Group at the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii and was the Asian advisor for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. General Stilwell served in the Air Force for 35 years, spent time in Japan and Korea as a linguist, a fighter pilot, and a commander. He also served as the defense attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing during 2011 to 2013. He is very familiar with how CCP works. So I just give you his conclusion, his summary of how to deal with CCP based on his understanding of the CCP. And he said, towards the CCP, United States cannot just take normal diplomacy, but to use transactional diplomacy. So what does that mean? He will explain. And General Stilwell started with our interview talking about the turning point of dealing with the CCP differently for the United States after decades of appeasing the communist regime, which was started by the Trump administration.
But in 2017, the Trump administration published the National Security Strategy, in which we defined China as a strategic competitor, which that's just stating a fact. And that I think was the true beginning of getting the American government and American people to look at this problem differently.
Yeah, I really would like to address this issue. But, going back to what happened on Tiananmen Square in 1989, how do you think United States and the international world, their reaction had an impact on what's happening in China?
Let me fast forward to 2016, when the Philippines took the PRC to court, the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, and they said that Chinese actions in the South China Sea are illegal. The maritime claims of the entire Nine-Dash Line were not legal. And the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea came back and said the Philippines was correct, that what China was doing was illegal. The American response was not good. The American response was, it's fine, China, it's okay, let's turn the page. That's the language they said, is let's turn the page, and basically said, it's okay, we're not going to stick with that. We're going to walk away from this judgment, and we're going to continue to try to work with you on environment and these other things. We did the exact same thing. That was a Democratic government. That was John Kerry. But the Bush administration, the Republican administration, did the exact same thing in 1990, is we said, we have to take some action, China, but we're going to make it the minimum we have to, and let's get back to building the relationship. That may not have been the best choice. Again, we are so eager to give the government the benefit of the doubt. And after 40 years of this, finally in 2017, we decided we can't give them the benefit of the doubt anymore. We have to do something. And that's what we're doing. But your question is, what was our response? Our response was initially to sanction them and to criticize this action. But then we very quickly said, let's get back to trying to build a relationship.
According to your understanding of CCP, how such kind of position, how CCP takes such kind of position from the United States?
I think they take it as a weakness. We consider it being generous and considerate and trying to preserve the relationship. And I think the CCP takes it as saying that we're afraid there might be a reaction, or there's something in our own government that keeps us from taking what the CCP would have done. I mean, the Chinese government would have done something like that. During my time in government, we were very adamant to be very clear that you take that action, we're going to respond. You do that, we're going to respond. And in the diplomatic world, when you study diplomacy, the word transactional is a bad word. Reciprocity is a bad word, right? If they punch you in the face, our initial reaction is to kick you in the knee, right? Or is to respond. The diplomats don't like that. They want to try to bring you over for a glass of wine and explain to you why punching me in the face was a bad idea. Well, we weren't communicating clearly with the Chinese when we did that. So you punch me in the face, I kick you in the knee. And I think I don't like that approach. I hope that we can move up beyond that into something more, great power-like. But until we get the CCP to understand that we're fed up, we're not going to do this anymore. That is the approach we're going to have to take. Transactional.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You mentioned how the turning point of the U.S. government's U.S. policy in 2017. But before that, actually, I remembered your speech at the CSIS in December 2019.
Right.
You mentioned about President Bill Clinton. When he first came into the post, he had a strong position on human rights issue in China, but later on he took up an idea, if we do more trade with China, then it will make the political transformation in China, it will be good for Chinese people, blah, blah, blah. But then obviously for the Trump administration, said, it's failed. So to your understanding, why such kind of policy or idea failed?
I don't think the Chinese Communist Party has the ability to change. What we saw what happened with before Tiananmen, right? We had Zhao Ziyang and Hua Guofeng. We had leaders of the day realizing that as the USSR, the Soviet system was failing, they were next, and that they needed to change. And so they actually, I think, it took like a month of listening to the students' demands, trying to appease the students, maybe making small changes to accommodate their desire to have a voice in their government. But that suddenly, Deng Xiaoping and others said that we're not going to do that. And so they took a hard line, which is what authoritarian governments do. They don't negotiate, they dictate, and they crack down, and here we are today. I mean, imagine how good things would be in the PRC today had they taken a different tack and simply just begin to gradually liberalize the system. You remember the village, Wuhan elections? Remember the Wuhan village where they were experimenting with at least local level elections? Of course, that would build up to national level. This seemed like it gave us all hope that, maybe the Communist Party understands that if you want to avoid the fate of the Soviet Union, you're going to have to slowly allow people a voice in their government, let them pick who is their government, and a voice in how things are, and a choice of who their leaders are, a voice and a choice. And we were hopeful that with Wuhan and these other things, that there was going to be a change. The only change we've seen, especially since 2012, is a change for even tighter and tighter and tighter government and control of the economy too, which is actually hurting them.
You mentioned about how the U.S. policy had a really dramatic turn, in 2017.
Yeah.
So what do you think the most important thing that the United States realized about the CCP to make the change?
I was in the Obama administration. I was in uniform. I was a one-star general in the Pentagon. People knew then, but the problem is they didn't know how to address it. They didn't know what to do. And it required a very radical change of policy, of speeches, just about a mindset. But we had an administration that I think wanted to try to keep things friendly and peaceful because of environmental concerns, which are valid, but you can't sacrifice larger national security to a small aspect, in this case, environment and the rest. So I think they tried to have both their cake and eat it too. They wanted to have a positive working relationship in the environmental world, while at the same time stopping militarization of the South China Sea. And in 2001, they crashed into an American airplane operating peacefully in international airspace. They crashed into it. They nearly killed the 20-plus people on that plane for whatever reason. And what they're doing with Taiwan right now is they're, creating situations where you will have an incident. You're putting aircraft with forward-firing missiles on them out there to be intercepted by aircraft with forward-firing missiles. The intercepts are normally peaceful airplanes that are unarmed, and then a fighter looks to make sure that they're operating safely and all that stuff. That's how it's supposed to work. They shouldn't be launching fighters and bombers and offensive weapons into Taiwan. That's been going on for a long time. So you asked about the turning point. I think the other side, we were seeing those things. The previous administration saw that, but they couldn't figure out what to do. And the new administration had a clean break, new people, and it was a good opportunity then with the national security strategy, with the economic relationship. And that's what got everybody excited, was that Bill Clinton allowed the PRC into the WTO, World Trade Organization, in 2001, with the promise that the Chinese would adapt their system to something that respects the rule of law, honors fair and equal access and all those things, and they didn't do it. And it took us 20 years to realize it. And it took Donald Trump, a businessman, to say, we cannot accept this, where, as he says, the largest ripoff of, another country in the history of the world, billions and billions of dollars through intellectual property theft, through bad business deals, and all the rest. All those things came to a head with the change of administrations and a president and an administration that was willing to take that risk. And here we are. And I think it was long overdue.
So do you think the previous administrations, they didn't do it? Is it because they are not have so much understanding of the CCP, or they just maybe have other things, strings behind or something?
I think it's both. I think there was a misunderstanding of the party. The two people who preceded me in the job I did at State Department didn't have a deep background on China. That's okay. I mean, it's East Asia Pacific. It's not the China Bureau, and that's good. They had great information on other parts, but if the number one challenge was dealing with this government, it would help to have people who had a solid background in that, to include language and all of those things, time, living in China, etc. And so my replacement, a guy named Dan Crittenbrink, has all those things. We work together in the embassy in Beijing, and his Chinese language is much better than mine. He's got much more experience. So that's the right guy to have in that job today. He came out of Hanoi. He was the ambassador to Vietnam. Perfect. That's great. Unfortunately, the predecessors didn't quite have that same experience, and that, I think, led to misunderstandings of how you deal with the CCP. As I said before, you've got to go to the lowest common denominator, and it's got to be transactional. You give us one journalist in China, we'll give you one journalist in the U.S., and one diplomat, and that's how you have to build this relationship back up. Because if they promise you something, I guarantee you they won't follow through. There's no way you can get the CCP to follow through on promises because they don't care about credibility. They walk away from these commitments because they don't think it matters. It's, when you're a great power, it matters. Your word matters. And if you don't live up to it, your credibility and your legitimacy is called into question. I know my replacement understands this, and I hope the folks in the White House today understand that too.
Yeah, so talking about, you really had a lot of deep understanding of how the CCP thinks and how they work. So maybe could you share with us how did you come up to the understanding? Maybe some experience or stories.
But, as I think I told you before, living in China, living in Beijing, and getting to travel. Here's a point that most Americans understand. Beijing is not China. The real China is in the hinterland, in the border areas. A trip I made to Changbei, Tsuen, which is North Korea. It's on the border of North Korea. I learned a lot. I mentioned I spent a lot of time down in Yunnan on the Burma border, retracing Joe Stilwell, General Joe Stilwell, World War II exploits, building the road and all those things. Tiangao, Huangdiyuan, right? The further you get from Beijing, the more normal a place it becomes. So actually, that experience was very beneficial. This is where I got the idea that the Chinese people and the Chinese government aren't the same thing. Never conflate the two. CCP, Chinese people, different. If they would allow the Chinese people to vote, if the Chinese people had some say in how the government operates, you might be able to say that, but they don't. Then I went to the Pentagon and I worked the same issue for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and I got to deal with the Chinese further in this regard. And that's where I did most of the negotiating, and this is where I learned to negotiate with the CCP. Distrust and verify. You need to always write in a verification regime. You have to say, you promise to do this. If you don't do that, then here is what's going to happen. If you remember the economic talks, trying to get out of this tariff tit for tat that we saw in May of 2000 and I think it was 18, maybe it was 19, Liu He and Lighthizer came up with an agreement. And it was actually a very good agreement. And it included verification regimes. Liu He went back to Beijing to try to sell this to Xi Jinping, and they wouldn't accept it because he knew they don't plan to live up to this agreement. And so Liu He had to come back and apologize, and they had to go back to negotiations. So when you deal with them, you have to want to expect that they're not going to live up to their word. But I hope they do one day. I hope they understand that their legitimacy as a government is at stake when they do this, and start acting like a big country.
Yeah, so in your experience dealing with the CCP, what do you think is their biggest misunderstanding of the United States?
Well, as I said earlier, we have not been very consistent. I gave a presentation I'll send you if you want to look at it. It's called the folly of engagement, the mistake of thinking that by engaging with the CCP that we can somehow work out a deal that benefits us all. Every government that comes in thinks that they are the ones that can get a deal with the Chinese that will be ironclad and will function. Every 2, 4, maybe longer years, we change out. I left, my predecessor came in. We try to stay in contact, to share with them what we agreed to, so they can't take advantage of us, but we don't. But Cui Tiankai spent 8 years, the ambassador to the U.S. spent 8 years as the ambassador in the United States. And he has some time in Japan, but mostly his experience is in working with the U.S. That long experience of dealing with the Americans should result in a better understanding of how to deal with us. But with the advent of the previous administration, the Trump administration, we changed the rules of that game, and it left the Chinese unable. They didn't understand how to deal with us at that point, because we were simply defending ourselves for the first time ever. I think they're still trying to understand now how to deal with us, how to still sign up for everything and do nothing, and get us to stop tariffing and speaking openly about the Olympics, about genocide, about all those things that we have to date been very quiet about. So I think there's still confusion in China about this new approach the United States has taken. They probably understand, but they don't want to change the way things have been going because I don't think they can. The economy is really starting to take a downturn, and to comply with their agreements with the WTO would just make it even worse. They would have to play on a level playing field, and they can't afford that. They would have to stop stealing research and development data from American universities and other places, and do it on their own, and they can't afford to do that. So they're kind of in a bind. And if I was them, I would negotiate.
So from what you said, basically the Chinese Communist Party, they just don't want to change themselves, but they wanted to try to figure out different administrations in the United States how to deal with that so that they can get their way.
Correct. So they don't have to change. Figure out a way to get this new administration to go back to the old ways, where we allowed them to continue to violate agreements and those things. I collect every time Xi Jinping says, we will continue to reform and open up, kaifang. We will continue to do that while doing the exact opposite. Whenever you see a headline that says, in People's Daily, it says, we will continue to reform and open up, you know the opposite's true. They're going to make it even more difficult to do business in China because they think that's the only way that they can survive.
All right, so that's General David Stilwell. How do you think of his sharing of the lessons learned about dealing with CCP? So, a couple of things, right? He mentioned about how to use the diplomacy with the Communist China. It should be transactional diplomacy versus a traditional diplomacy. And I think the point is do not just listen to what CCP says, but to take a look at what they do. And this is so true because in China, people, for people from mainland China, they just privately, they would say this, if not publicly. CCP can say the best thing in the world, but does the most horrible things of the world. So that's what CCP is about. And also, I think this type of transactional diplomacy is also another kind of peace through strength. I don't know if you will agree with me or not. The good examples are like, you remember John Kerry made all the way fly into China, but he was stuck in a long distance call in Tianjin near Beijing, right? And he's there already, but they didn't allow him to just to talk in person. And also remember the negotiation in the Anchorage, Alaska, where the CCP's foreign administrator just, criticized United States for like 16 minutes. So when you just try to show, goodwill, the CCP won't respect and won't respond to such goodwill. It would only manipulate your goodwill. Because why? As General David Stilwell said, because CCP does not respect promise and does not care about credibility or goodwill. So we cannot just believe any promise made by the CCP, but have to look at the actions and the results. And there are so many examples that, people already feel the pain of it, right? The WTO, what happens to South China Sea, and these public companies listed in the United Stock Exchange, and also Hong Kong. Such painful lesson. The CCP won't respect any treaties, any promise that it made. So, to normal people in the United States, Americans are just very kind, and we will, you will trust the person until the person proves to be that he or she does not deserve your trust, right? But towards CCP, you cannot use your normal, reasonable thinking, You just do not trust CCP until it proves to me otherwise. So, that's the lesson. And we hope that more the United States politicians can learn that. All right, next we'll give you updates from China, from Shanghai. In Beijing on Sunday, it was the May 1st, and it was the beloved May Day celebration normally in Beijing, in China. However, in this May Day, Beijing just started the day with for people to stand in line for the latest round of mandatory COVID testing. Beijing imposed bans on restaurant dining, shut down theme parks and issued new requirements for recent negative test results to assess for people to access public venues. And the Chinese state-run media Global Times newspaper sought to normalize massive nucleic acid testing as a permanent feature of life, it raised apprehension about a possible citywide lockdown in Beijing. The Global Times on Sunday tried to quell rising panic in Beijing by portraying massive COVID testing as an unremarkable new facet of daily life. The newspaper mentioned that other Chinese metropolitan cities, including Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Hangzhou, have announced similar guidelines to normalize nucleic acid testing. The article also touted the tech hub city of Shenzhen, which is in the southern China, as a shining sample of city avoiding lockdowns with aggressive nucleic acid testing. But Shenzhen did go into lockdown in March. So again, it's just lying. So again, let's give an update on Shanghai. We've shared with you, some just horrific videos from Shanghai. It's very sad. And the latest one showed an old man getting stuffed into a body bag and who's dragged from a care facility, a nursing home, to cremation. The truck driver actually discovered he was still alive while they are trying to stuff him in the bag. So that happened on May 1st, on Sunday. A nursing home in Putuo district, which is in the kind of the center of Shanghai city, called the New Long March Welfare Institute, arranged for funeral home personnel to send away an old man who has been putting in a body bag. But the staff of the corpse truck found that the old man could still move and asked the staff of the nursing home to verify. After the negotiation between both parties, the old man was eventually sent back to the nursing home together with a body bag. Let's take a look. So the yellow bag was the body bag. They are trying to stuff him into it. Now they are discovered he's still alive. And they were saying, he's alive, I saw it. Don't cover him anymore. And he's positive, don't get near to him. So that's what happened. The whole process was discovered by the people of Shanghai, and some netizens shared the video on social media. According to a report by the Chinese media Dongfang.com, both the New Long March Welfare Institute, the nursing home, and the Putuo District Civil Affairs Bureau confirmed that the clips circulating on the internet are true, and stated that the elderly in the clips had been transferred to the hospital for treatment, and the current situation has stabilized. The Putuo district of Shanghai also said that it would file a case against the officials and the doctors involved. But before they had an announcement, the funeral home quickly praised the staff's work attitude of respecting for life and awarded each person a bonus of 500 RMB. The Shanghai official did not mention of the incident at the press conference, but only claimed that the situation of the pandemic prevention and the control in Shanghai was stable and improving. So we also shared with you last week about a viral video called with the title of "The Sound of April." Do you still remember? It has no comments, only just recording the real voices of people in Shanghai about what they are going through. Now another video called The Scream of Shanghai is going viral again, but the voice, people's voice in this new video is angrier than what's in The Sound of April. The CCP authorities continues to impose inhumane lockdown of the city of Shanghai, and the tragedies just continue. So this video collects the people of Shanghai, how they have been pushed to the borderline and have been expressing their voices of resistance in various ways. So let's just take a look at this video. It's just a clip of it.
我逝去方舱，什么病都看不了，我就是和孩子一晚上在外面吹风，然后现在已经到中午了，告诉我什么病都看不了。我不知道中国上海现在是怎么了？我们的政策是怎么了？是怎么了？如果孩子身上真的有病死了怎么办？还有人管吗？医生有人管吗？有人管吗？还有没有王法？有没有王法？是不是人还有没有人性？这次疫情其实只是或者小小的感冒和发烧，但是给我们上海人民带来的疼痛，是我们难以承受的、难以言表的，我们非常的痛心。
Okay, so that's I just collected a few clips from this video. So remember, you probably don't understand the voiceover, but there was the subtitle, and the video began with a song, and actually it's a CCP song, but people in China they just rewrite the lyric, saying that the sky of the Communist Party is a dark sky. The people of the Communist Party are shameless. And they also saying before the bandits were in the mountains, now the bandits are in the police. And also someone was saying that for people in Shanghai had to just line up in the heavy rain to take the testing, and saying that we are not even, cannot compare to a dog, how a dog was treated. And so you can hear how angry people are. So, and the CCPs, what they are doing, is awakening a lot of people, and the people are demanding, like, why you impose this type of policy? Is there any law? All right, so yeah, that's what's happening in Shanghai, in China, and hopefully more and more people are waking up to, what's really going on and do something. All right, so before we go to the joke, I wanted to, take a look at some of the comments. And James said, imagine the psychology of those who work in the CCP. That's so true. The psychological problem of those working CCP. In people, a lot of people are split. They just, it's totally, like, it could be, a lot of people had mental problems, as you could imagine. And Real Truth, Sherry, this was all planned. Keeping people in lockdown is cruel. I have no words. That's true. And indeed, they have their agenda for locking people down. So let's see more comments. timer tag character saying so much horrible things going on there. CCP is going against the science. Yes, they are not only against the science, they are again going against humanity, as Shanghai people are shouting out. You know, where are you? Are you human? Are you human? Is there any humanity there? So, you know, you can feel the pain that people are going through. James, California said the CCP must be abolished. Yes. And Real Truth, Sherry saying, Wayne Kathy, I wasn't getting your notifications. I'm glad to see all is well for you both. Yeah, thank you, Sherry. So unfortunately, this happens to a lot of people. So yeah, don't you just try this? Unsubscribe from our channel, then resubscribe, and also click on the bell to see if that would improve the situation. So hopefully that will work. And Timer Tanga character saying great lesson. Yes, I think you're talking about the public companies listed, the Chinese public companies listed in the United States, right? Yeah, it is a good lesson to learn. So we hopefully, you know, our administrations, the politicians will keep that in mind and also be smarter dealing with the CCP. All right, so I think that now I will go to the joke, and it is provided by Wei. So although he cannot be with you tonight, he's still thinking of you, so let's hear this joke. So in view of the food tension caused by the war between Russia and Ukraine, UNESCO, which represents United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, organized a discussion with children from all over the world. And the speaker asked children to give their personal views on the issue of food scarcity. After the question, the children were encouraged to speak up if there's anything that they don't understand in this question. So an American kid was the first to raise hand and saying, "Excuse me, what does scarcity mean?" And then followed by a North Korean child raised his hand timidly and saying, "What does food mean?" And then a Chinese kid raised his hand with a very curious expression and says, "Excuse me, what does a personal opinion mean?" All right, so yeah, from that, it's a joke, but actually it has a pretty profound meaning, right? So in North Korea, people just going on hungry constantly. They don't know, the kid doesn't know what food is. And in China, there's no personal opinion under the tight control of CCP. And in the United States, kids doesn't know what scarcity means. And you know why. All right, so I think that's all for today. Thank you for being with me. And remember, if you have not yet clicked the like, please hit the like button, and please help us spread word by sharing our video. So take care. I will see you on Wednesday. Good night.